first person who I worked for, Robert Hewitt Wolf, who was a producer on Deep Space Nine and created Andromeda and gave me my first job, to Kenneth Branagh, if we're talking about actual benefits of the job, the greatest benefit was, having Kenneth Branagh sit around and read your dialogue and then, recite Shakespeare and just remind you what a bug you are. So, I think the big thing has been perspective, because everybody approaches story in a different way, and I try to absorb some of that from everyone. I mean, it's like you look at Josh Friedman, who is the king of the slow burn, who believes that a scene is not a scene unless it is something that you can convey without dialogue. Although Josh writes the most amazingly funny, long-winded dialogue scenes you have ever read. So, everything kind of in moderation. But yeah, I think everybody has something to offer, and I try to take something from that.
I would say that for me, I've been working on this. Movie for a very, very long time, called The Juliet. I've actually bought the short story rights in 1996 and have been working on it ever since. And recently we hired a director, Rupert Sanders, who directed Snow White and the Huntsman. And when he came on board, he brought a very specific, fresh point of view to what he thought the movie should be. And because of his strong point of view and what he wanted to put on the screen, the movie has now an actual chance of getting made. And so I've gotten the closest to making this film after all of these years, and I would say bringing in, somebody who has a hit movie is the benefit, because maybe I'll actually get paid after 16 years. So, thanks.
I guess for me, as far as a collaborator that sort of brought me into what I'm doing now, which is writing, is this guy Christopher Golden. He, when I was working as an actor on Buffy, he approached me. We had mutual friends, and he was like, I've been writing these Buffy comics, and I think, from what I know of you from this mutual friend, that you would be able to do this with me. Would you be interested in doing a Tara Willow comic with me? And I said, yes, I would like to do that, because that would be stupid if I said no. And it opened up this world, so that I wasn't just an actor anymore. I was somebody who was a creator. I was creating things, and it started with the comics, which came from the Buffy world, but it was creating new stories for these characters. And then we created other things together. He and I did an animated show for the BBC. And wrote books based on that universe, and just meeting him and having somebody who did that for a living say, you can do this. You may think you can't, but you can. You just have to do it. You just have to put yourself out there, and it's persistence, and it's writing every day, and it's finding something you want to say and saying it, and finding a voice that you can speak with. And so without having met Chris, I wouldn't be sitting here now. I'd be probably downstairs at the picture thing, signing just my picture. Over and over and over again, which I love doing so much. It's way more fun to be up here with all of these guys who are awesome and make things. I like being part of the making things group. I like giving voice to other people's stuff, but making things is where it's at.
One of my favorite collaborations hasn't actually happened. It was one that Amber and I were chatting about. We kind of were talking, we did a reading together and kind of dared ourselves into reading our sex scenes.
That is on YouTube.
It's on YouTube. And then we ended up co-reading Amber's, which is one of the best signing events that's ever happened in my life. And so I got a taste of being an actor, briefly.
Yes, he finger banged my character. On a subway platform in New York City.
Don't give away, that's a spoiler. But no, we ended up talking about it later, and we were joking around. I'm like, we could get together and write some erotica, And we kind of threw it out, and we made it one of the stretch goals in a fundraiser that I run every year, and we didn't quite get there. But, you know, I was so excited to write that piece of erotica. Not because of just the erotica, you know, partly yes, because of the erotica. But, I mean, for me, it was, I mean, again, I spent, see, this sounds worse and worse the longer I but I...
Together, make our goal.
I do spend a lot of time alone, clearly, writing these things. But no, come with me to where I'm really going here, all double entendre aside. You know, I take my books really seriously. I take it seriously, I really do. And when you're working on this 400,000 word book and you're obsessed on every sentence of it and all the layers of the story and whatever, it's very easy to lose your sense of play. And we're at our most creative when we are at play. I mean, kids know that. And anybody who has ever watched kids knows that. Because they just make up games. And so we talked, I'm like, yeah, we could totally write this, some like trashy urban fantasy, vampire hunter, erotica. You know, I'll write the female point of view, you write the male point of view. And I was like, oh, I want to write that. And suddenly, my sense of play is engaged in writing again. And that is something that I realized once I had the thought of doing it, I realized how much I had lost it and how much I missed it. And so I've been actively seeking out these other projects, like doing this video game or doing a comic book, that will help me, you know, to kind of draw me out of that solitary place and let me like goof off with other writers in a productive way.
What a horrible job you have. What's the biggest challenge you've faced working in different medias?
I think comic books are a big challenge for me because I think very auditorially and not particularly visually. I don't think like a director. I think like someone who's writing a radio play a lot of times. I love the sound of words, the rhythm of speech, puns, like all that stuff, the language, the way a scene plays out, all the layers, the subtext, all that stuff. And when it actually comes down to who's in the frame and what point of view are we seeing it from? Are we looking over someone's shoulder? Is it a pure point of view? Are we on a tricky overhead shot? How many panels will it take to tell this action? It's very, very visual and it's very directorial and it's just not what I do naturally, which makes me really glad that I've done it because it forces me to think about things that enrich the rest of my writing because you could go through a whole TV writing career and sort of never think like a director and just keep putting the words down and having been forced, having my hands, you know, having my prose hands tied behind my back, you just don't have that much room for words, you have to do it visually, has strengthened my writing in the other media.
I think the toughest thing about jumping between media is that everything has, I mean, if you put aside like different schedule requirements, right? It's like television is a business, man. It's like when they tell you that they need a script because in 5 days a camera is going to roll and it's going to shoot things whether you have a script or not. And it's happened, not to me. You know, in features, it's like an incredibly expensive hobby. You know, it's people want to have a script by such and such a time, you know, because they want to read it before they go on vacation on somebody's boat. Well, all right. Novels are like, of course we can get that to you before the 22nd century. That is no problem at all. But really the biggest challenge is that all of them have different requirements for storytelling. So, you know, in features, you know, you think like the big benefit is that you can go scopy. You know, you can do a lot of B-side. You can jump outside of the character's point of view. Instead of like you're with the characters and they're running and like they look up in the sky and maybe like they hear the sound of jet fighters overhead. Screw it, man. You can go straight to the jet fighters. And now you're in the Beddor point of view. And they're bombing stuff and they're in their own movie. And you can do all of those things. The restriction is you've got 120 pages. You got a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you don't have the benefit that you have in television of saying, well, it's the end of the episode, and hey, tune in next week. So you have to finish it. And of course, the thing about a novel is, again, it's amorphous. The structure of a novel can be, it's deceptive because it's actually not true, but it can feel as amorphous as the schedule might be for the novel. A novel can be almost anything. And so the tough part when you sit down and you start to write is saying, what is this? And now I have to have the discipline to sit and commit to it and say, this is what this needs to be as an entity that I'm writing to, or you can make yourself completely crazy. I mean, obviously everybody has their own style and their own approach, but that was the thing for us, was deciding what can this possibly be, and how do we approach this in a way that it serves the storytelling and it serves what the audience expects when they sit down and they experience it.
For me, most of the things I've written, well, almost all the things I've written have been within the Looking Glass Wars universe. So when I switch from prose to a graphic novel, or when I wrote a screenplay, the most frustrating part and the difficulty is when you come up with a better scene that you wish was in your novel, and you're like, wow, what was I thinking? And I had a couple of situations like that, and now I'm trying to figure out how to put it in without everybody reading saying, hey, wait a second, you changed that. So I'm trying to come up with logic so I can get that one scene in that I really wish I had in my book. And that part's a bit frustrating. And then when you're jumping around from medium to medium, like I've been trying to turn my novel into a musical, and so I wrote this outline. I went to New York and I met with these composers and lyricists, and we sat down and I met with 5 or 6 of them. We had lunch, and they said, hey, this is great, but there's like 7 to 10 musicals in this outline. You got to tell me, all I need is a scene that is motivated because the character wants to sing. Give me a scene that tells me the character has to sing, because he can't speak it or she can't speak it, he has to sing. I'm like, wow. So, you know, with a lot of feedback from them, I went back and I tried to really simplify it. And then it was editing, and then it was cutting out so much of the novel that I felt like I was butchering the thing. And then I had to bring in somebody who had fresh eyes and a fresh perspective, because it was just too daunting to edit that much of the story and switch around characters to make it you know, viable as a musical, which I'm fine with because every medium has its structure, and that's cool. I think you should honor that. And I still am ignorant on how to write the music book, but you know, I'm willing to take a step back and collaborate with somebody who's a lot smarter at it than I am.
Wait, what was the question again? I got lost. I was just like, what would motivate us starting this scene right now?
Have you ever written erotica with Patrick Rothfuss?
That's a great question. I'm so glad you asked me that. I'm going to make him write about a transsexual character.
Yeah.
Woo! Woohoo!
Yeah.
But so
The real question was, what are the biggest
I
challenges?
thought I was joking.
The biggest challenges you face working in different formats.
They're all hard. Everything you do creatively is the most amazing experience ever, and also probably most gut-wrenching, because even when you're writing a novel by yourself, you have an editor who's like, wow, that didn't make sense, you need to go back and rewrite that whole chunk there. And you're like, but it made sense in my head. Like, well, my head is not what people are going to be reading, hopefully. But, although it would make for fine reading, let me just say. But yeah, I think everything I've done, I've been daunted by. But I feel like if some little dinky kid from Alabama can like come out here and like write books and act and make movies and do stuff, like, then anybody can. Because like when I was growing up back there, like there was no way that this was going to happen. Like this was not like I wanted it, but it wasn't like, yeah, I live in Los Angeles and it's all going to just happen for me. You know, you kind of got to look at it and go, well, if she can do it, then anybody can do it. You know, all of you can make stuff and be creative and be conflicted by all the horrible things that happen in every medium that you write in to do. So yeah, that's not that question or the answer to the question, but Pat's going to answer it now.
Tune in next, panelist. You know, when I tried to do a little picture book, I had to struggle to let go a little bit. He would add some stuff, And sometimes it was brilliant, and of course it's easy to let that slide because I can take credit for it. But then effectively I was having to learn how to be an editor, you know, and so if he put some stuff in, I'm like, that's actually not what I meant. But you know, I'll pick my battles and that's okay. The big one that I've been struggling with lately is I told somebody I'd write him a short story like a year and a half ago. And so I told him I'd do it in a year. And so a year and 2 weeks later, I start writing this story thinking that, you know, 4,000 words, and 4,000 words is nothing. And I realized I can't write a 4,000 word story. I sat down to write, I go, I've got this great idea. And the story goes, and it telescopes out, and I'm like, I'm at about 25,000 words. And I've got some great ideas for what happens next, and then eventually somewhere out there, I know the ending. And I'm like, I don't think you can fit this in your anthology anymore. And they go, really, really, it's fine. I'm like, no, I don't think you have space for a 50,000 word short story. It doesn't qualify anymore. And so I pull it back, and then I say, well, okay, tiny story, I'll do a tiny story. And I start it, and it goes, wah. And I hit like 25,000 words, which was better. But still, that's a novella, you know? That's like as long as Stardust, if you've read Neil Gaiman, you know? And so I'm like, okay. And that's what I've learned is my language, I actually strive for brevity, which sounds ridiculous. But it's true. Every sentence I try to make very tight, very important. I spent a whole weekend once going through this huge manuscript and pulling out every instance of the word that was not essential. I mean, that's like 20 hours of that. And I pulled out 2,000 of them. That's like 3 pages of that. And it's a difference that no one will ever come up to me at a signing and go, I really liked how careful you were with your superfluous thats. But you know, trying to write these short stories, I'm like, you know, I can just cut a scene off every once in a while. I can be like, you can figure out the rest. ... And then I think, oh, you know what would be interesting, you know what would be really cool is I learned that you don't have to do that either. I can say, well, that's a different story actually. Put that over there for 3 years when I'm fulfilling this year's obligation. So yeah, like anytime you go anywhere outside your comfort zone, it terrifies you and you are forced to adapt. And I think if you do not if you don't put yourself into that dangerous territory, you run the risk of becoming stale, becoming complacent, fooling yourself into thinking that you know what you're doing. And I think that's death to most creative types. You might still do what you're doing very well, but I think that you will lose, I don't know, the newness, the landing yap. No, I have no good word for this thing, but this generative thing, this sense of discovery and growth as a writer that keeps you on your toes and keeps you honest.
We have a little bit of time for questions, if anybody has any. Do you want to come up to the microphone right here? Okay. No, run.
Hello. First of all, Jane, congratulations on CW for Husbands.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah, she's referring to, Husbands is going to CW Digital.
So how do you guys deal with branding across media, like for yourself as writers? Like how do you like go
It
like,
hurts,
I
right
do
now.
all of these things.
It's flaming iron.
I feel like the sci-fi brand, having worked on sci-fi shows, is so strong that now I kind of want to play against it by reminding people that I came out of comedy and sort of trying and getting to try my hand and trying what he was talking about the sense of play of like, well, I haven't done this something over here for a while and I want to do something over there. And so I have an image instead of branding of plate spinning, and I want to keep as many different plates spinning and keep from getting locked in one plate. Well, whatever.
I'm trying to create a niche brand of rage and dick jokes.
I think you're on your way.
I don't think it's very niche, actually.
Are we in the same brand?
Broad audience for...
Dick jokes.
I've come to a lot of comic conventions, and then I do a lot of school events, and so I try and try to target a particular audience. So my novels are for young adults, so I do a lot of schools, and then I come to comic conventions and try and get out and meet readers. So.
What Jane said, plate spinning.
Yeah, also what she said. Because for me, when you're a novel writer, if you're a success with your series, what do you want, right? You want more of those books forever. You just want them to keep writing that same book again and again and again, or something in that world, or something with that character. And as soon as I started to get successful, I'm like, oh, it'd be really easy to become that guy who writes those Quoth books, and forever. And so, you really have to fight, because they're like, oh, here's like all the money, if you would write another one. I'm like, well, I could use all the money. But I don't want to necessarily be trapped in that. And I look at the creators that I respect, like Joss Whedon, when he hits something and it's awesome in Buffy, and he's like, this season we're doing something different. And then everyone's like, oh. And then you're like, I like that, do more of that. And he's like, no, this season we're going to do something different. And he would do it again and again and again. I'm like, that's ballsy. That's incredibly good storytelling, because you will never get bored of that. Tad Williams was the king of epic fantasy, and then set $1 million on fire when he said, I kind of want to write some virtual reality SF. And it was a great story, and it was incredibly gutsy of him to fight every financial and fan request that he do that. So yeah, trying to break the brand is my big thing.
Great, thank you.
Hi guys, my question is mainly for Patrick, but kind of everyone in regards to television structure, I guess. I'm working on something very epic, in terms of scope and length and everything. So when you're laying the foundation for building a whole world, between the culture, the history, the character development over, the lead over the how you're going to frame it, with the framing device, where do you start to build from, and how do you, and the same applies to television, shows like Fringe and stuff like that.
Well, in my vast television experience, I would say do a lot of the world building and then leave virtually all of it out.
Yep.
You should know it. You need to know it so that you don't have to write it in your story. Or sometimes you need to write it so you know it, and then you take it out. And you hint. You hint at a lot of things. But nobody wants to read an atlas of your world. 5% of what you know maybe ends up about the world. Yeah.
What we actually did on Caprica was to hire Bob Harris, who is a travel writer, to essentially write an atlas of the world, to write a guidebook to Caprica and all the colonies. And we just used it as background information. Like you're saying, we left it all out, but if we needed a character to make a joke about, oh, that guy's from Erelon, you can smell the horse manure on his face. It's you need to know that Erelon's a farm planet to make that joke. So we sort of made sure we knew lots about each colony, to just use it to inform it, but not to try to wedge all that stuff into the scripts.
But I think it gets to the most important thing about, I was going to say just about television, but it's not true, it's about everything. When you're writing a story about characters. If you're not writing a story about characters, IMO, you are writing a story about nothing. So when you create a world, what you are doing is you are creating the context that person lives inside of, and that context informs every decision they make, every word they say. So, as Patrick said, you create that world, you forget it, but your character knows it, your character lives in it. You know things about your world that you don't talk about every day. You don't have to tell people that Starbucks exists, right? They effing know. And you have to treat your characters like that too. So do that work for yourself, but let your characters be the focus of what you're writing.
I agree with these two guys.
Thanks a lot, guys.
We have time for one more question.
My question is for Ashley. How did the writers for the Thor film even approach writing it? Because I know there's a million comics, and yeah, I've always been really interested in that.
The short version is that at the time that we worked on that film, it was holy crap, they needed somebody who hopefully could work fast, hopefully. And I'm like, wow, Horseman is like, what's this about? So when we had that meeting and we got into that, it was a position where we understood a world, and because we understood a world, we could say, well, all right, well, this is easy. This is just a story about two boys who love each other very, very much, and they desperately want to prove to their father that they are worthy of his love, and that competition brings them to odds, and their love for each other brings them to odds. That was the story, and that resonated with Ken because Ken, of course, is like, you know, he loves this family tragedy stuff. I don't know why. So again, it comes back to the last question. You know the world, you know the people who live in it, and the story emerges from that.
Thank you. Let everyone know that Mysterious Galaxies in booth 1201, we have signed books by Patrick Rothfuss, signed books by Amber Benson, signed books by Ashley Edward Miller, and we will have signed books by Frank Beddor because he's going to be down in the booth signing after this. And
I can get you some signed husband comics.
That would be amazing. Can you come by the booth?
I mean, I'd need the books to sign.
Then that would
if we get some books, I can sign them right up for you.
That would be wonderful. And I think we actually might have time for one more question if anybody wants to
I have a question.
microphone. Who has a question?
For those
Patrick.
of you, can I do this? Can I ask you a question?
Please do.
Sorry. For those of you that have, because I do hope to eventually maybe wander into some of this, like, real collaborative writing that you guys have been involved in. Right now, it seems like we've dwelled a lot on, oh, it's all so lovely and it's magical. And
You are really scared, huh?
I know it can't always be good, right? And I know that it's not really cool or
Definitely
polite.
hate sex.
That was going to be part of the, but like, I know it's not an issue of do you occasionally want to rage choke someone, but like, could you share a little bit about how that conflict resolution happens?
I mean, if you have a boss, then the boss wins, and that's why writers' rooms move forward. When on those days when the showrunner can't be in the room and there's no one who can make the decision, nothing gets done. So it's...
And so it's solid, like, hierarchical, you got the boss and then the minions. It's like...
Kinda, yeah. I mean, if Joss is in the room, nobody goes, nah, I don't think we're doing that. All the conflict goes away when Joss says, you're right, you're wrong. We're doing that. So you don't have to worry about duking it out.
You know, I love my writing partner. He's like a brother to me. I can't imagine working without him. But, you know, we've been at loggerheads occasionally. You know, people ask us how we work. Do you guys work in a room together? Do you write dialogue together? We say, oh, no. That would be like a cage match. Two writers and one writer leads. It just would not happen. So I think identifying boundaries and what's important to you about the story, I think, is the way to avoid, not to avoid conflict, but to deal with conflict if you're constantly going back to what's important to the story.
Yeah.
I think another panel is trying to occupy the same physical space.
I think we can take them. I think they can't define Calliope, Lanyap, or graphic.
I'd like to thank everybody. Thank you all. Thank you all for coming.